It's so easy to be negative and criticizing towards yourself. We all have a little voice in our heads that always has something mean to say to us. I've struggled with this before, always telling myself that I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough. It affected me in pretty harsh ways, pushing me down a path of depression and anxiety. Negative beliefs about yourself can change the very structure of your brain, and it can create very strong and deeply rooted beliefs that do nothing but harm your self-image. Hear me out for a second. I was at work last week and I had this song called Far Away by Yeba stuck in my head all day. I found myself singing or humming this song throughout the entire 9-hour shift. And surprisingly so, looking back at it, I didn't even acknowledge this earworm that I had. I liked the song, so it wasn't annoying or anything, but I just kept singing it on repeat without any reason to question it. After my 9-hour shift of this song running through my mind, I got into my car to leave work and I turned on my music for the drive home, and the song that started playing on my Spotify was that same song that was stuck in my head. I hadn't finished it all the way, so it was still playing, but before work I must have been listening to it on the way there. It was the last thing I listened to before going into work, so it must have gotten stuck in my head because of this. It's believed that songs that get stuck in your head, or otherwise known as earworms, can be caused by an emotional connection between your brain and the content of the song you are listening to. There's an emotional connection between me and this song, and I vibe with it pretty heavily, so it makes sense that it got stuck in my head. And you're probably wondering how this song stuck in my head relates to the issue of self-limiting beliefs. I'll tell you where my mind is going with this. Listening to this song just once before work had it running through my mind all day. If a harmless song can get stuck in our heads so easily and run on repeat, imagine what kind of self-doubts could be running through our heads on repeat without us even knowing. If things can get stuck in our heads because of emotional connection, it makes sense that self-limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves would form an unbreakable bond in our minds, because we attach very strong negative emotions to these negative beliefs. No matter who you are, everyone has some negative beliefs about themselves. Things like, I'm not smart enough, I'm too shy, or I'm not attractive. And if you can bring to mind a negative belief that you have about yourself, just think for a second. How does this belief make you feel? Odds are there is some type of emotion that comes up, and with that, it's most likely not a very positive one. Luckily for us, the human brain loves emotion. No matter if it's good or bad, when the brain feels emotion, it immediately forms an attachment to this emotion and the situation that caused it. The brain does this because emotion is like an assessment for the brain to determine if something is harmful or beneficial. An example of this would be feeling fear in response to confronting a bear, so the brain knows that bears should be avoided in the future. So when we have negative thoughts about ourselves, they may not be repeating in our heads randomly throughout the day like a song stuck in your head, but they are still repeatedly played in our minds. However, when negative self-beliefs come up, it's not random. Certain situational triggers might come up that kind of allow the brain an opportunity to reinforce a negative self-belief. These triggers could be things like when you fail a test in school, your mind might see this as an opportunity to doubt your intelligence. I'm not smart enough no matter what I do. Songs and negative self-beliefs both attach to our minds because of emotional connections. But the difference between the two is that negative self-belief is often connected to negative emotions, so they can be more powerful and harder to get rid of. Songs stuck on repeat in our minds can't really change our brain function as drastically as negative thoughts can. As triggering situations continue to come up in life, your brain might begin to pay more attention to the evidence that supports your self-limiting beliefs, and it might ignore evidence of the contrary. An example might be if you repeatedly tell yourself, I'm not good enough. You may start noticing situations where you fall short of success. And when you do end up succeeding in something, you don't acknowledge it as much. It's like you only want to acknowledge your failures. This is called confirmation bias. Basically, the idea that your mind sees the world how it wants to see it. Science has come a long way, and now we have a pretty good understanding of how the mind works. We know that the brain's neurons can undergo changes that forms new connections and new beliefs that can reshape the brain and the way it works. If you continuously find yourself in situations that reinforces your belief in your own self-doubts and insecurities, then your brain will form new connections. These new connections in your mind will form core values that truly believe that you are not enough. Basically, your brain will change its shape, building its foundation around the idea that you are less than capable of success. Just as I wasn't completely aware of that song stuck in my head at work, sometimes we aren't always aware of the negative self-talk that we relay to ourselves. But if it continues over long periods of time, these negative beliefs will become ingrained deeply into your mind, and you won't be able to ignore them for long. This can be a real problem, resulting in long-term depression or anxiety. I was lucky enough to get out of it, but in my past, I experienced a mild version of my mind being reshaped around my own flaws. Even if you think that you don't find yourself relaying negative beliefs and doubts to yourself, take just one day out of the next week. I think you'll surprise yourself at how negative you can be towards yourself. Just one day to try to be aware and mindful of the thoughts that come up in your mind when you face stressful situations. Notice any negative beliefs that arise, and once you notice these negative beliefs, start to actively try to look for times in your life where you see evidence that supports the contrary of these negative beliefs. Here's a quick example of this. Let's say you fail a test, and you notice your mind relaying a negative belief about your inadequate intelligence. And then a couple weeks later, you pass a test. What you should do here is consciously notice that you passed this test. Your intelligence is not inadequate. This test score helps to prove that. Make sure to notice your own capability of success. Make mental notes of your accomplishments. This will help show your brain that yes, you do fail, but also you succeed. And as you actively bring to mind your accomplishments, your mind will start to notice them more too. The great thing about our brains is that they always change. If you get stuck with a head full of negative beliefs, just know that your mind can undergo change once again. And in the future, you are very capable of having a mind full of positive reinforcements. More or less, it's up to you to try to change your mind.